if anybody hasn't yet.
Right.
So,
Perfect. Right, in which case,
a huge Gemma, thank you so much for joining us. This is the Monday, 24th of January, 2 p.m. This is the first post-lunch keynote on the Monday. This is theme of today is, as you may know already, special educational needs and disabilities, mental health, neurodiversity, and well-being in tutoring, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's important that we cover each of these areas as fully as we can. So today, at this keynote slot, we will, as you well know, be joined by Jemma Zoe Smith, who is the director and founder of the Education Hotel. Now, Jemma will be talking about understanding high learning potential and gifted and talented students. That's what the HLP at the top there stands for. So as a short introduction, Jemma is both the founder of the Education Hotel, which is a boutique tuition agency that supports families around the world, and also an education consultant who helps pupils of all ages and levels achieve as highly as possible. And you can see there that Jemma has worked around the globe, truly. London, Dubai, Wyoming, Hawaii, New Mexico, Prague, Cannes, and I imagine many, many more places. So if you are someone who has worked in the high learning potential area before, then this will be a really strong refresher. And if you're new to this area, you've not heard of gifted and talented students, or you haven't worked with them before, then Jemma will provide a solid grounding to understanding some of the features and ways in which we can work with it. As ever, a huge thank you to Nudge Education, who delivered a really strong pre-lunch segment, a couple of sessions there, for the wonderful work they've done in supporting this festival and eradicating chronic disengagement in this country, and also to Remedy Tutors, part of the Remedy recruitment group, who are sponsoring day one at this festival and who do such incredible work supporting disadvantaged pupils, again, up and down the country. But this next 55 minutes, this next hour is for you guys to hear more from Jemma. So I will hand over to Jemma at this point and enjoy this keynote.
all right. What I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen. So I'm hoping that you can let me know that you can see it, just to make sure. I think, can everybody see the screen?
That's wonderful, yes.
Perfect. And the other kind of disclaimer is, as you will come to learn in the in the presentation, I myself am dyslexic. So if there are spelling errors in this this presentation, apologies. I probably can't see them. So just as a kind of forward disclaimer. All right, so I'm going to be speaking this afternoon on HLP, which is high learning potential. Sometimes in schools called gifted and talented, gifted or able, all that kind of area. And what I'll be doing, I don't need to go through this slide because Ludo's already introduced, but I'm going to be talking about what really HLP or high learning potential means, a little bit about my personal story, because I fit into some of the categories that I'll be talking about. I'll also be talking about how to support students who are HLP, not just students, but also parents and sometimes schools. I'm hoping that we might be able to have a breakout room to have a little discussion. I've got some profiles that have been taken from my company. We've anonymized everybody, and we're hoping that tutors can get together and have a discussion about how they might be able to support students. Then just before the end, I'll discuss the difference really between gifted and bright, and then where to go for more info. Again, I've written the slides, they are full of text. I will not be reading from the slides, but they are there if you would like to go back. I know that it's being recorded, so if people are watching it back and wanting to kind of read more, then I've put a whole load of information on those slides. So if I'll begin. So HLP is something that we don't often come across the terminology, especially in the UK. It's something that I'll use a couple of acronyms, HLP being one of them. Another one is DME, which stands for dual and multiple exceptionality. They're mostly US terms. In the UK, we talk about gifted, or at least in the school sphere, we talk about gifted and talented, gifted students. But what I'm talking about are students who are usually kind of come in the top 2 to 5% IQ of the population. They might not always show that. And that's why we use the word potential, because ultimately what we're saying is a student has the potential to be at this area and potential to be high achieving. They might not be achieving at that point, and that is something that we often come across. But these are students who usually will make quick analysis, have really great memory, and have the capacity to learn really quickly. We do have a checklist for HLP, and it's been developed in the US, again, where it's a little bit more known. And if you cast your eye over this checklist, it's a little bit fluffy. So things like good at puzzles, long attention span, compassion for others. And I know that there'll be lots of tutors who'll be sitting here going, well, I've got lots of students who fit within that checklist. It's a 25-point checklist. And ultimately, for a HLP child, you're looking at someone who meets almost all of those bullet points. So lots of children will meet some of them, but a HLP student will meet the majority of them. But again, it's something that is harder to tell, and we don't put every child through an IQ test in the UK. So HLP and high learning potential, giftedness, is something that again is harder to diagnose. And one of the ways that people use is something this is called the tripart model. The tripart model looks at both high intelligence, so that would be your IQ test, and outstanding accomplishments, and that is within a safe environment. So you might not always see a child who is having outstanding accomplishments, especially if their kind of potential's there, but they're not necessarily achieving, and a high potential to excel. So these are the three areas that when you're making a diagnosis or you're looking at a student being gifted, this is what people are looking at. And for tutors, we particularly come through in that green bit, the high potential to excel. It's something that is identified often by coaches, by mentors, by tutors, because we are in the unique situation that we can see people on a one-to-one basis. So we can make sure that a person is kind of showing their best, and we can put them in that environment. So the other thing, there we are, is a lot of those checklists that I put up here do overlap with the number of other special educational needs. And this is part of the reason why, when it came to deciding where does HLP sit, I was quite keen for it to be in today, because a lot of these kind of characteristics, so for example, a concern with justice and fairness, a quirky or a grown-up sense of humor, lots of these a really kind of persevering interest, a lot of those overlap with other SEN needs, and it's something for which you need to differentiate, and in schools really need to differentiate, just like in SEN needs. But we're often, when I'm working with HLP students, I'm differentiating kind of to a different need. So I see HLP as something that should be included within SEN, because it's that thing for which, when a student is in a school, differentiation is really important, because otherwise you can get a number of problems. And that's the other reason why I wanted it to be in today, was, well, why does it fit in mental health and well-being? Because this thing called asynchronous development. Now, asynchronous development appears when you've got a student who is able to hold a really interesting conversation with an adult age 4. And I come across students like this. Their particular interest is something that they can hold a very mature conversation about. They are in school and maybe they're 6 or 7, but their math level is 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds, or they're looking at doing GCSE. And I work with students who are HLP on a daily basis. And sometimes you forget that they are that age. And whilst their academic prowess may be much higher, and often is, when it comes down to it, they are still that age. So you've got this student who can be very, very advanced. And with that often comes this kind of mature judgment and this mature way of speaking, and this elaborate vocabulary, a way that they can communicate. But you then have this point where, for example, they turn up to lunch and it's not what's on the menu. And that can often trigger a temper tantrum, essentially. Students who are HLP feel really alone. And I worked on this presentation. I had a call earlier last week, with a charity that supports HLP, and I'll mention them a little bit later. And I said to them, what's the one thing that you'd like tutors to know? And they said, well, especially with the younger students, they really struggle to voice their feelings. And this is something that, if you are a tutor who's looking at kind of primary level and you come across a student like this, they really do struggle to articulate where they sit, especially within feelings. And often that's not something that you would expect, because you've got this student in front of you who they know so much about their particular subjects. So I've got students who know the entire periodic table and can tell me about any element that I ask them, what it does, how it's used, what its mass number is. But that doesn't mean that they are that level for everything. And it doesn't mean that they're that level in terms of being able to talk about their feelings. So that's why I thought it was important for it to come into mental health, because not only does it need that differentiation in terms of SEN, it also brings with it these additional needs. For example, this asynchronous development. And the other one is really boredom. And many HLP students come to tutors because they are bored. So typically, I will get a student who comes to me because they're in school, and school is maybe differentiating. They may well be differentiating, but they are still bored. And this is a student who, if we go back to the checklist, here we are, they've got this usually quite big interest in justice and fairness, and they're usually emotionally quite sensitive. They're usually kind of mature in the way that they speak, and they are usually aware of what's happening around them. And you put that with boredom, and you put that with a system that maybe, for example, I have students who know how to, they know how to write, or they know how to, for example, do long multiplication, but in their class they're doing simple addition. They're bored. They're really bored, and they also know that they know it, and they don't want to be talked down to, or indeed they don't want the work to be too simple. They really want to be challenged. So if you're a student who is, you're kind of mentally know that you're way beyond this, there's several things that that a student can do. And one of those things is disrupt. And we get students who are highly disruptive, who are HLP. So they have a really high IQ. And because of that, if you give them a really simple task, and an often repetitive task is often where it comes in, these will be the students who will call out in class, who will name call, who will get up and walk out the room, who will generally just try and disrupt the class because they aren't being stretched. These are also the students who will have arguments with the teachers because they have that moral sense of justice. So if they are talking and the teacher tells them off but didn't tell someone else off because they were talking, that's where you start an argument. So you get this interesting kind of clash of boredom and sensitivity. So this is why I thought it useful to put into kind of SEN and mental health.
Give her the big one.
So kind of why is this worth knowing as a tutor? And what I'd love for you guys to do is, if you can just write into the chat for me, now, what do you think is worth knowing about a student when you start to work with them as a tutor? If you imagine having somebody as HLP, how could that help you to be able to help them? So if you've got a new student, what's the point of knowing that they're HLP? Like, why is it that it's important? And I'd love for you to write that in the chat so that I can have a look. Perfect. So it's not assuming that their behavior is poor or disruptive. Absolutely, Charlotte. That's something that's really important. I get students who are labelled from school, who come to us because school can't deal with them, and that label has often become their identity. So 100%. Recognizing that their needs might not be currently met, 100% as well. Whilst schools will always try and differentiate, and part of what I'm going to move on to talk about really will be about schools. Often for these students, their needs won't be met, not 100%. So meaning that you can plan for their needs. Adept says plan for their needs and don't judge that behavior. Absolutely. And it might not be that behavior is for every child. Often you get you get a kind of quiet, withdrawn, maybe quite perfectionist child instead of one who challenges authority. But the differences are kind of the outward way of seeing it. The inward battle is always the same, which is that they don't necessarily fit in and they don't necessarily have the ways to explain why they feel different. A priority should always be to meet their needs, definitely. Ludo, thanks for we'd be the first maybe non-parent adult who understands them, and part of what we look at is advocacy, and being able to advocate for yourself and being able to explain yourself to other people. And that often comes from being able to mentor. Tutors aren't just there for academic needs, that they're really there for a whole load of needs, and that can often be understanding a student. Perfect, Alana. Yeah, allowing students to question things, and they're not questioning your knowledge, they're doing it because they really want to know. So I have students who come along and ask me, yeah, but why is it that this was called this? So, for example, iron is Fe. I'm a science tutor, but iron is Fe in the periodic table. Why is that? Okay, we'll go away, we'll look it up. Yes, but why? But why? But why? But why? And they're not doing that because they're trying to be provocative in any way. They're doing that because they really want to know. Helen says to avoid patronizing them. Yep, definitely. And to offer something different to what they may be experiencing at school. And a safe space for them, not just to, I suppose, to show off their abilities, but also to stretch them a little bit, to be able to listen. Perfect. We got some really great answers coming in. Thank you, guys. Yes, it's a really interesting one from Dr. M, chemistry tutor. But appreciate conversation with an expert. So talking to a student on that level is really, really useful. For a HLP student, often their parent has come to you or come to me because they have run out of knowledge. So I get students who are quite young, but their parents have just run out. They don't know where to go, and therefore they're looking for their child to have that chat, just to be able to talk and ask questions to an expert. Perfect. We've got some really great stuff. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Those are really, really useful. All right. So we've got an idea about why it's important to be aware of HLP as a tutor. I wanted to share a little bit of my story with you guys, because I am what is called DME, and DME is a form of HLP. A DME is dual or multiple exceptionality, and doesn't mean I'm exceptional in many ways. What it means is that I have a learning need, a learning disability, SEN. I prefer learning need. So I'm dyslexic, but I also come within that percentage that says that I come as HLP. I didn't know this until I was diagnosed at 18 with dyslexia, and actually I didn't fully read my report until several years later. So my knowledge of HLP has really come as an adult. But I started writing down some bits about myself, and I thought it would be useful to share with you guys some of the traits or some of the things that maybe showed that maybe I kind of fit into this bracket. So for example, I was recommended to start school early because I was bored in Montessori. Montessori school is all about following interest, and I, by all accounts, can't remember it, but by all accounts, I was an early reader. I'd outgrown the Montessori class that I was in, which was designed for preschool. It wasn't a full through Montessori. I had a really, really big interest in butterflies, and most insects. And a lot of people who know me as an adult know that I still have that interest. But to the point when I was a child that it was really a big interest. I would read a lot about it. I would talk a lot about it. I would tell anybody who listened. My parents put me in a whole load of clubs. And again, that was, I've asked them, apparently it was to stop me getting bored. And I did a fair bit of kind of teaching the class in primary. Secondary was a little bit of a different story. Right at the start of grammar, I got into trouble kind of across year 7 because I did that whole challenging the teachers thing. I recognized authority, definitely, and I respected teachers, but I didn't understand why one person would get into trouble and one person wouldn't. And I didn't understand why one person would, or I still saw the injustice in when I got to sixth form, and I was being given predicted grades that were different to a friend of mine, and we asked why, and it was because she hadn't turned in homework, but I also hadn't turned in that homework. So there was an injustice, and I definitely kind of pushed in terms of teachers. I was one of those quieter ones though. Throughout secondary school, I kind of sat in the back of the class, wasn't noticed, very much slipped under the radar, and eventually kind of did well at my GCSEs, got put in the gifted and talented group at school, and kind of got that last little bit of support from school. But when I got into university, it pretty much fell apart. And I started to see that I almost failed my first year of exams at Oxford, and I just about passed And my tutors said to me, go and get a diagnosis because we think you're dyslexic. Now, in that report, my ed psych also did an IQ test, and I came out as HLP, but it was flagged. It was just not something that I really noticed when I was diagnosed. I was kind of too busy on the dyslexia part. I actually ended up dropping out of university. So 1 week before my exams, I dropped out of Oxford. I took a year off and I came back and went back, got my master's, did my PGCE, etc. So I represent a version of that HLP student. Now, not every HLP student is the same at all. There are many different ways of people presenting, and I have that additional being dyslexic, so DME. So the dyslexia, in terms of the way that DME or dual and multiple exceptional students see things, is that often your learning need might interrupt your HLP. So they become kind of this balance, and that's very much the way that it's been for me. But as I said, it's not for everybody. HLP is seen in very different ways. But I thought it might be useful to share a little bit about what I was like and how I worked, and generally to allow people to see kind of what it is like to maybe have these learning needs. And I know that there are, as I said, there are people who are HLP in kind of different ways, just like there are people who have other SEN needs in different ways, and not every person is the same. So ultimately, I'm halfway through, and hopefully you're thinking, well, what can I do as a tutor? We've thought about why is it important to know that somebody might be HLP, but what can a tutor really do, and how can they really support? So I've got a couple of bits on how to support students, and then also how to support parents. And what I've done is I've discussed this with a charity. They're called PPUK, Potential Plus, and they are the UK's, I mean, they're my go-to when I come across a HLP student. Often when someone comes to see me or my team, and I have a small HLP team, often parents won't necessarily know that their child is high learning potential. They might have been told that their child is clever, but they might not be able to they might not know about HLP. So firstly, how can we support students? And this is stuff that has worked for my students working with the Education Hotel and with my team. The first thing to say is that a tutor can be really great for HLP, because you can spend one-to-one time and you can find out exactly what it is that means that a child can achieve, and move from having that potential to achieve to being able to achieve. And by being able to achieve, they gain that confidence and they start to understand a little bit more about themselves. But a couple of things that we found that really work, being interest-led is one of those really big things. So whilst a student has maybe areas of weakness, and HLP does not mean being academically gifted across the board, very much not that way. It's often what we call a spiky profile. So a student might be really advanced in a certain area and not so, and maybe age appropriate at other levels. And others they might really struggle with. So whilst a student might have those weaknesses, finding out how it can be covered in that context of interest. So making sure that you plan activities that both engage them and stretch them in terms of having big questions and being able to find out new things, but also being able to work on the things that they might need to work on. Understanding that those people have sensitivities. Like any student, you need to work around their needs. And for a HLP student, there are some fairly big differences. For example, we're used to as tutors, or at least I'm used to as a tutor, especially in math, recapping. doing questions that show that a student knows how to apply their knowledge. HLP students often hate repetition. So a lot of that recapping, a lot of that going through has to be done in a different way. So I've taken students who are age 11 through their GCSEs. So in that regard, to avoid any kind of recap or kind of what they see as repetition, we do it in a different way. So I have my students, or one of my students was doing comics to present how he knew information to me. Or he might decide that he would tell me in 6 sentences. I would always pick something like 6 sentences to tell me this entire topic. What do I need to know? And all of that avoids that repetition. It avoids that kind of repetitive work, busy work, which HLP students tend to really, really rebel against. I actually ran this next one past PPUK because I thought maybe it's just for science, but I've been told it's for majority of subjects. Really trust a student when they say that they know it, because a HLP student knows if they know or they don't know, and will often be frustrated if you assume that they don't. So when I first of all started working with HLP students, after I discovered that I'd had it, that I started working with students, and I used to say to them, "Oh, so do you know this?" And they'd say, "Yeah," and I'd be like, "We're just going to check that," and then I'd often get a big outburst of anger, and they'll be really frustrated, or I'd try and reteach it because I think, well, maybe you don't, maybe as a tutor, I'm meant to be doing my job and I'm meant to be teaching you. So instead nowadays, what I do is I go, okay, perfect. So let's just chuck that question at you and let's see how you do with it. Perfect, I can see you know it. Or, okay, I can see that you understand it, but maybe you're missing some key terms. So often when I teach, it won't be in the same linear fashion that I would necessarily teach some other students. I often do a lot of kind of project work and gap filling. A student who is HLP often learns like an expert, so they know where they're missing stuff, and they know that that they don't know it, and that can be really useful because they can come in and they can say, "This is where I need to work, and this is what I don't know, and this is where I need a question on." But it also means that when we're doing something like a bigger project, they can go and fill in the little bits that are missing for them. So it isn't necessarily a linear pathway. And with many SEN students, it's not a linear pathway. But with HLP, we're often kind of backfilling. So sometimes they'll know really advanced stuff, but they would have just missed something kind of terminology wise. And the last thing that I thought was useful is often when I talk to my tutors about this, they talk about, oh, we can do extra exams. It's not for everybody. So it's kind of a beware. Some students will want to do exams early, and I definitely have I have some students who do them really early. For example, I've got an 11-year-old who's doing A levels, but not all of them, because some of them have real anxiety over it. So again, treating the individual. In terms of supporting parents, as I said, many parents might not be aware of HLP. So maybe suggest, oh, your child has these advanced reading skills, or I noticed this, have you noticed that? But as I said, and I will say the whole way through, the best charity to point parents towards is PPUK, Potential Plus UK, and they are lovely, lovely people, and they are really, really knowledgeable as well. The other thing that's worth being aware is that for some of my HLP students, I work with the school as well. And that is often because schools and parents, schools see one side of a student, parents see a completely different side of a student, and tutors often work one-to-one. And that means that we know often how a child learns best. in terms of schools, there is a one-page profile, and I'm sure many of you have heard of a one-page profile, but for those of you that haven't, it is literally a one page about a student. It says things that they like, things that they don't like, ways that they like to learn. And this can be really helpful for someone who's HLP because it helps the school to be able to differentiate. And it's often something that a tutor can help with because we know how a student likes learning. So it's something that to suggest if you're working with a family and they're really struggling to get school to understand. I mean, I go in sometimes with schools and work with students one-to-one, but if you are not associated with the school or don't want to do that, then often working with a parent on a one-page profile and using that as kind of an initial part of that conversation for a school can often help because they might not see the same child that you see, because as a one-to-one tutor you're providing that best environment, and often they're showing you the best version of themselves. Sometimes they don't start off as that, but they often are with a tutor. They might not be showing that with a class. So again, working with a school, it tends to be sometimes that you can work with schools via the parents, and really reminding a parent, because I get a lot of parents who are at the end of their tether when it comes to schools, but I do try and remind them that the school really do want the best, but that sometimes that means being able to work with a student in a different way. All right. Perfect. So what I've got, and I'm going to hope that Ludo is here somewhere, is I've got a number of profiles of some of our students anonymized, and I was hoping that we might be able to go through and pop ourselves into a breakout room. Is that possible?
Yeah,
is Ludo
just
here?
tell me how many people you want in a breakout room.
Jack's here. Perfect. Okay, how many have we got? So we've got 35 people. And give me 1 minute. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to stop sharing and get my notes. I have how many profiles? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 profiles, so that makes 7 people per room, if that works. All right. So Jack's going to put you into breakout rooms. Are they called breakout room 1, 2, 3, and 4? Is that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, and what I'll do is I've got some information for each person on one of our profiles. What I'll do is if I should I put it all into the chat, Jack?
Yes, if you drop it in the chat so everyone can get it, and then they've got it before the breakout rooms.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll do. It just seems to be.
Just while Gemma's getting that ready, it would be great, guys, if we could see some extra videos, just especially in a breakout room. It's much easier to interact and converse when there are some videos on. It's quite hard to talk to just a Zoom name. But yeah, if that's possible, guys. Obviously don't want to make anyone turn their video on if they don't wish to, but
okay, apologies guys, for some reason it's not pasting. It is. Okay, right, there we are. So it just needs me to paste them all separately. So I've got numbers above, so hopefully those of you who are going in breakout room 1 and 2 and 3, there we are. And these are our little profiles of some of our students who we have seen. All right, so that should be, there we are. That is all 5 of those. So hopefully when we go into the breakout rooms, everyone should have a person.
Lovely.
All right.
Okay, what's the question for them to, do you want me to send them?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
so
please.
what's the question for the breakout room?
So I would like our tutors just to think about how you would tackle a student who is like this, and what you would want to do for your specific subject interest, really.
Lovely. Okay.
All right.
Off you pop. You should have
All
a
right. So hopefully everyone can see those profiles. Bye.
Okay.
Brilliant. All right. Shall I reshare so that we can get going? Hopefully everybody had a useful chat and took a little bit from those profiles. As I said, they are snapshots. They are the original kind of snapshots of what we got. So hopefully everyone has had a bit of a see as to how different HLP students will present, and also what you might be able to have a look at. Yeah, I would also, same as Jack, would really like to hear any kind of highlights in the chat as to and add any ideas that you've had or things that you thought were particularly interesting, because as I think many people might be able to tell, HLP is kind of my passion project. So I love hearing people's ideas about it and how we can work with students who have HLP.
What was that project you recommended, Catherine?
I'm just saying that both my older boys, they did EPQs, and that was a chance to sort of go to town on something they were really interested in.
Yes.
And also, it really massively helps in terms of UCAS personal statement.
Yep. You can get a younger version as well nowadays. So EPQ for 16 plus, but you can get, I think it's called the HPQ, which is for younger students. So that is definitely a worthwhile one. I think Alana as well.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. So we had the young child, which was perfect for me, obviously, as that's the age group that I work with for 7+ exams. And one of the questions that came up in talking, I'd be really interested, Gemma, if you have any thoughts on this. I was recounting about a 7+ student who got into St. Paul's, but actually crashed and burned within the school afterwards, and it was a disaster. And looking back on it now, he was definitely HLP, without a doubt. And I wondered what the statistics are, if there are any, on the number of students who, or the correlation between those who succeed highly at 7+ in particular, because that's my area, entrance exams for the top schools, and those who have HLP.
I don't know that correlation, but I know that there's a very high number of homeschooled HLP students, and it's usually because of what you said. So student who, for example, St. Paul's is quite well known within the HLP community. Some of the independent schools are, because they are usually pushing in math, and often math is something that a student is advanced in, but they struggle with that transition. Actually, I think I had a student of ours who struggled with the school transition. And one of the things that we do to support is put mentors in place, so that they have that transitionary period supported, and usually bring that one-page profile with them as well. But the mentor usually provides, often we get a student who goes into another school, doesn't necessarily get an initial first impression that's great, and then just sticks their head in the sand and won't engage, and really that initial memory of school becomes really negative. So that kind of pre-part, what we're doing as tutors is we're putting mentors for our HLP students, so that they've got that person to come back to, that person to talk to. And also, we were talking about being able to advocate for yourself and being able to talk about how being HLP affects you, and advocate in terms of your learning needs and in terms of what it means for you. It's something that students don't get until they're much later. They really struggle to articulate those feelings. So hopefully I haven't quite answered your question, but I've kind of gone around it.
No, it's really interesting, Gemma. Thank you. And I suspect there are no statistics out there, but I think it would be a really interesting thing to examine, is the correlation between the two.
Definitely. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So lots of people talking about kind of building that relationship and being able to, Adet says, kind of going through the interest and that project-based stuff is so useful, because it's something that project is really useful. The kind of last couple of minutes that I just wanted to point out, and I know that there's I don't want to overrun, just as tutors, we will typically get parents who say my child is gifted, and I just wanted to bring out, because I often get parents who say this, a student who is bright doesn't necessarily need the differentiation that a student who is gifted does. There is a difference. We would class, and by we, I would say Potential Plus UK and the gifted kind of, there's like an assessment. Gifted typically is a student who is 2 or more years ahead of the class, but that can be masked. So you might have a student who has the potential to be that high, but if it's being masked, you might not see it. Bright, what I've written does not necessarily need differentiation. I don't mean differentiation within the class. I mean that they might not need, they might need, for example, the differentiation for higher students in the class, but they don't necessarily need work from several years above. Bright students are often top of their class, not bored in every single lesson. Bright students will often do well in tests, HLP might not. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I know that sometimes we get parents who come to us and say, my child is gifted and my child is this, and it might actually be that they're not HLP. So I wanted to make sure that tutors can go away with this understanding of maybe what is HLP, but also what is not HLP. So that's that last kind of slide. And then the last thing that I wanted to put up for you was just a couple of resources. Obviously, if you'd like to find out more about us and about HLP, I've popped our email there. I've also stuck down Potential Plus UK's website, really great charity. And then I've got a link, which is Warwick's link for how to work with high potential learners. It's a whole load of research, academic articles on pedagogy. And that's it, I think. I don't want to overrun, because I know there's a really interesting talk coming next, and I want to make sure that they have time to set up. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing, I think, if everyone is good.
Jemma, thank you so much for that. That was a really, really well considered and professional and incredibly informative event. I think everyone would agree who's been here. So thank you so much for that. I imagine there will be a barrage of emails and messages to you asking about further questions. I'm sure you'll probably have to put on another webinar in the coming weeks just to field so much interest there, exactly as Jack says. So thank you so much for that really, really important Monday topic. As you've alluded to, the topic of conversation, of discussion that's coming up next, which will be about young people and issues and around drugs and decision making, and how we as tutors can be part of that. But just before we finish, we're going to play a little short advert just to tell you guys a little bit about who Qualified Tutor is, what the Love Tutoring vision is, and how you can join in a little bit further. But one final time, thank you very, very much, Jemma.
Sure.
The world is changing.
And so is the world of tutoring.
What it means to be a tutor is transforming before our eyes.
Subject specialism is no longer enough.
And going it alone won't serve you or your students.
That's why Qualified Tutor matters.
Qualified Tutor matters.
Qualified Tutor matters.
To offer tutors a chance to be a part of something special.
To be part of the change that's coming.
to connect and collaborate with other tutors.
Who are as passionate and proud of what they do as you are.
To feel more confident.
About the unique kinds of tutor you are.
No matter what subject or age range is your specialism.
And no matter how long you've been tutoring.
To earn a quality mark that will set you apart from the crowd.
And most of all, to improve outcomes for your students.
So the question is,
So the question is,
are you ready to join us?
And take your first step to become the tutor your students deserve.
Are you ready to become a qualified tutor?
A qualified tutor.
A qualified tutor.
a qualified tutor.
A qualified tutor.
Are you ready to become a qualified tutor?
So that is the question that I will leave ringing in your heads and minds. Jack will very kindly share in the group chat, in the Zoom chat, a few ways about how you can go about becoming a qualified tutor and joining in the vision that we have laid out, I've been laying out for the past 2 years. 2022 is going to be another massive year for us. So as Jack says, do start by entering the raffle. The first raffle of which will be in just about 55 minutes time. At 3:55, we'll be drawing the first prizes for today's raffle. And we will also, straight after that, be hosting the first set of discovery rooms.
We haven't been clear enough about that. Let's just say